Hello and good afternoon. So you'll notice here I'm in the workshop rather than the garage, finally getting some track laying done. So what you can see here is the throat of the fiddle yard for the Edwardian layout that I'm building. It's raised up a little bit. If you can remember, there was an adapter plate here which raises this to track level because the track on the layout is running on a viaduct. So that's why this is up like this. So it's actually really simple to set out a throat like this, and that's what I've done. So the first thing to do is to work on your alignments, or at least establish them. So these are the two parallel tracks here and here, which reach from the scenic part of my layout. Now this double slip here is actually non-functional in a straight original configuration. I've added this in, so at some point I'm going to add an extra corner module which will allow someone to shunt the fiddle yard, both sides of the fiddle yard, from the main line over here, up down this way and into here. For now at least, the only side of that that's going to be running is this one. This will allow someone to move into any of these three tracks here. So once you've got that entry point, it's quite important to keep things parallel. I think on the scenic part of the layout it's really nice to have sinuous curves and lots of angles, and I think parallel lines on the visible part of the baseboard are really bad. But what I do think is that for maximum efficiency in a non-scenic area, it's pretty important. So these lines here run parallel down the length of the layout, and that's where you see this one. This runs through this double slip and straight down there. It's not stuck down, which is why it doesn't look parallel, but it will be when it's sorted. Now this is the underside of the other set, the front side of the fiddle yard. So I wanted to go through what I did. So firstly, this wire, you can see, this goes down to what's called the frog. So the frog is this section here. So I have insulated rail joiners on this inside section. So this middle section here is isolated from these two tracks, which is quite important for polarity reasons. Chadwick TMD has done a great video on install frog versus electro frog, and he talks all about that. Just take it for granted. You need insulated rail joiners on this side. And then what I've also done is here. You see there's originally jumper wires that connect this side with this side. And what that means is when you're flipping the turnout like this, so if I'm up, so now the straight route is being activated, the electrical connection here goes through here, through that little jumper wire, which I've removed, and then into this, and it allows this to be powered. If you're using a power feed from here, you don't really want this to affect that. You want this to switch totally independently of this. So to do that, you cut these two jumper wires here. Now this section now is totally electrically isolated. It's fed only by this wire here. So I'm using DCC, so I'll be using something called a frog juicer, which essentially means I put positive, negative in either side, and then this goes into the middle, and then it figures out the polarity for me. On my scenic part of my layout, I'll be using point motors from the get-go, so I'll be using the point motors to switch that polarity, but this time I'm probably going to use these just by hand initially until I figure out a way to put the point motors on this board without it costing me a fortune. So that was the first thing that was happened there. So it was insulated rail joiners, cut the webbing, but then also, you'll see here, if I just try and focus properly, I've added some jumpers horizontally, and now because we've cut this, this is a way to ensure that whatever happens, there's always power going to these blades. So you can do this without affecting this, without cutting these, and this is just an extra bit of reliability, and I have no idea why they didn't do it by default. But this just makes sure that before this break, before here, this whole section here is always going to be the same polarity as the adjacent rail, and this just forces it to happen. So now this is basically just a mechanical switch. There's nothing in there which is handling power, because it's done by either the adjacent rail or fully isolated like this section and fed from here. So the next stage is to lay the to lay the turnouts, as you can see here, in place and start marking things out. So you can see here I've got a horizontal line adjacent to, let's bring it around this way, horizontal line adjacent to the turnout tie bar, and I've done that on both sides. And I actually used this mechanical pencil, stuck it into the hole and wiggled it back and forth. So when I take this off, there'll actually be a nice little slot there, which is the full movement of that tie bar. Because what you need to do is drill a bloody great hole. So this hole here is underneath this tie bar. So then from the bottom, I can feed in a piece of wire, which is not going to work because I can't see properly. But will then the wire will move, which will do this at some point in the future. So that's my provision for that. Of course, this wire here, the one I mentioned that has the frog power, also needs to go down into a hole. So if I turn this over, you'll see it's all connected, and that is intentional. So generally you don't want to solder huge lengths of rail together, but it's fairly important in a section like this where you might feed power from one end or the other and the section isn't too long. So over here you can see those are my insulated rail joiners, they're in there, and these are my regular rail joiners on the outside, and they've been soldered in. So this means whatever happens, if I feed power to this rail, it's going to go all the way down here, all the way down here to the end, and I can also feed it from this side. And then I know that this rail is always going to be transmitting power very effectively through that. Obviously on the insides, here's another one, you don't want to have the regular rail joiners here. They need to be insulated. So remember, this section is isolated and fed from actually from this thing. So that is roughly how that works. So you want to ensure that you've sorted out the insulated rail joiners and the feed, snipped through the jumpers here and added your own jumpers in for every one of these points. And it takes a few minutes. And the last thing to note is that this track comes off the edge, and that's totally deliberate. I'll be placing another baseboard against this edge here, and then I'll be using some, where is it? Some of these. These are DCC Concepts PCB sleepers. So these will be glued down. They're very robust, very heavy, thick, solid. So they'll be used with araldite down to the edges, and then the rail will be soldered to these, and then I'll put the next baseboard up, slide some of those underneath, and it will be soldered to those two. So the single piece of rail will be going from this side to this side with two sets of araldited and soldered down PCB sleepers, and then when it's all said and done, then I will cut through the rail, knowing that everything is going to be held in place because these are soldered and glued down, and it makes it a very robust joint. What I didn't want to do is cut the rail here and then just hope that on the next board I would be able to align them by eye. It's just a bad idea. So that's it. The next stage is to cut away some of the webbing here to account for these and glue these down and araldite these, and to probably tack this down with some easy tack PVA, something with high level of tackiness, just to hold it in place. This is not going to really move too much, and then that should be that end done. I'm going to add a little bit of rail here, and again another set of PCB sleepers on the end to hold it fully parallel with the board, and that rail will go across into the scenic section as well. And in fact, that is probably it. So I hope that's been helpful, and I hope you've got some inspiration to do your fiddleyard throat, and I'll see you next time.